cannot think of a more cataclysmic event than the Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War is a turning point in United States history.
Vietnam is a hellhole, a killing field, hamburger hill, Khe Sanh, My Lai Mexico, POWs, Viet Cong. Everything happened in Vietnam.
The story of the United States in Vietnam was a story of ignorance, hubris, arrogance.
It tended to be evil, but I don't think it was intended to be evil.
We learned how big the gap was between what presidents were saying and what they believed.
We had a fight about the train 3 years ago.
I think they were sincere in what they were doing. Problem is, they didn't know what they were doing.
Our method of operation was called search and destroy. You just hunt for people and you kill them.
You pull the trigger, you can't take the bullet back, and it changes you.
It was kill or be killed. They had to live with the nightmares.
I wasn't the same person anymore. Those are the memories that stay with me.
For Vietnamese people, the events that took place were life-defining.
Là phải nói rằng là bắn lần đầu tiên mà thấy Mỹ chết thì rất là phấn khởi.
The anger was severe, strong, boiling.
This is a television war.
Seeing the graphic images marked a turning point in the American conscience.
One of the major roles of the press is hold power accountable.
You realize that our heroes are just liars.
Many of the things that plague our society today have their roots in the Vietnam era.
Our image of ourselves as the last best hope on Earth was shaken.
We were playing God.
We've lost our moral compass, and we haven't recovered.
We can't forget Vietnam. It's with us today.
That was the trailer for the Netflix docuseries Turning Point, The Vietnam War. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. 50 years on, and the Vietnam War continues to have a profound impact on America's global identity. In his latest in the Turning Point series, award-winning producer and director Brian Knappenberger provides an unfiltered look at a conflict that shattered trust in the U.S. government and exposed deep divisions in American society that still resonate today. Along with Brian, historian Lien-Hang Nguyen joins us to discuss how the Vietnam War still lives with us today. Stay tuned. Brian Knappenberger and Lien-Hang Nguyen, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you? Brian?
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for having us on this.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Well, just to remind our listeners and viewers, we're talking about Turning Point, the Vietnam War. It's the next Turning Point series, if you will, and streaming on Netflix and was released on the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. So congratulations to you both and for having you on. I'm sure it was in the States. I know when I was looking at it here in the UK where we're based, it was certainly in the top of the charts. So it's so shouldn't surprise. A great piece of filmmaking. So thanks again for and congratulations to you for your achievements. So usually we ask the filmmakers what is the series about. I think it's pretty clear and evident what it's about. It's about the Vietnam War, but maybe you can give us a synopsis of what particularly Turning Point the Vietnam War is about.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I do believe that the Vietnam War was a major turning point in American history and in Vietnamese history. As Lien says in the trailer, even this was a cataclysmic event. It's absolutely right. I mean, and I think the way that, one of the ways that we're looking at it as a turning point is I do think that the America that existed before the United States engaged militarily in Vietnam was just a radically different country than the America that emerged after American troops came home. And that new America that emerged contained the roots of a lot of what plagues our society today. Widespread alienation, deep cynicism, profound distrust in our government, a breakdown of civic institutions, distrust of leaders. We changed as a country. So I think, and that country feels a lot more like the world that we currently live in today. And it made us question our role in the world. Who are we? How should we engage militarily? And those were lessons learned or not learned as we went into future military altercations later on. So I think it was an absolute turning point in our modern history, and that's what we wanted to kind of look at.
Okay, I mean, and if I may ask a follow up, Brad, I mean, the why now? Well, obviously it's the 50th anniversary, but I mean, as you know better than I do, there's been loads of docs and films about Vietnam. Some great documentary filmmakers have dealt with the subject. We even had Tim O'Brien on this podcast a few years ago, so that was his perspective. But why did you want to lend your expertise to this subject? I mean, you've done the Cold War, you've done 9/11 and the War on Terror. What drew you to this? I mean, I think you've kind of already hit on this, but what really drew you to this and to do it now?
Well, I think this changed. This war has a lasting impact on people that both in Vietnam and in America, and kind of rippled through. With soldiers that came home and families, including my own. My dad fought in Vietnam, or was in the U.S. Army in Vietnam when I was born. On my actual birthday, I didn't even meet him for another 8 months or so until he was in Hawaii. So, it's true that there have been other takes on the Vietnam War, but I actually, and people say that a lot, but I actually think there haven't been. I actually kind of disagree with that. Like, you hear that a lot, and of course there's some famous examples, but there's not a lot compared to how transformative this was to world history and how important this was to history. I actually don't think there is. There's lots of documentaries about World War II, but not a lot that have really tried to understand what happened here. And in particular, not very many, if any, who have actually kind of extended that out to the modern day and said, well, how does this affect our culture now? So that's part of what the motivation was for this.
I mean, as you said, you were born during the war. I was born during the war. I mean, I'm an American by birth and raised in the States. I mean, it's been ever present in my life, even if I haven't directly been affected by it. I guess what your film also does is sort of amplifies some other perspectives, right? So, Lien, I mean, you're one of the talking heads, a historian, because you were born in Vietnam, right?
I was born in Vietnam. I was born at the tail end of the war in November of 1974.
Okay. So, sorry, that was not a way of trying to get you to tell us how old you are. Really apologize.
I don't mind.
I mean, this is one of these perspectives because Brian knows there was this period where no one talked about it, and then there was this period where we started talking about it in various ways, whether it was the film Platoon or different retrospectives and things. But from your standpoint, and as sort of a voice that hasn't traditionally been heard, what is? I mean, maybe you can say a little bit more about how much time do we have? But I mean, what does it mean for you?
That's a great question. And just following off of what Brian said, I think it was very important to do a documentary to cover the impact of the war on American society and American history, as well as Vietnamese society and history, and also just looking at where we are now, the impact of the Vietnam War. So, I teach at Columbia University, and I have assigned previous documentaries in the past to teach my students, because I think documentaries are amazing teaching tools. And
Right.
we just had our 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, the liberation of Saigon, or the end of the war is what I call it. And we had Ken Burns on, and
Right.
I've taught Stanley Carr now. But what Brian has done with Turning Point, I think, is really amazing. And again, in the spirit of full disclosure, I have a very hard time watching myself, so I'm only on episode 3, but I know the history so well, and what has been presented so far, I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing, I really think, labor of love, and I think one of the things that comes through are these fresh new perspectives, these fresh new stories and new interpretations.
I mean, and as you say, I mean, I think Ken Burns, he interviewed North and South Vietnamese figures and things like that in his docs. But I think what comes out is, I think, a perspective that maybe, there are these sort of conventional wisdom, right, about the war that even those of us who maybe haven't even read Carnell or some of these other books, you could just kind of hear. And it's interesting to get these perspectives. So certainly the soldiers involved. I mean, there was a few that, even how the South Vietnamese army actually fought, right? There was this sort of prevailing kind of, they don't, what are we supposed to do? Because they're not fighting either. And that was certainly, as the film points out, is not true at all, right? I mean, I think it's, I mean, I guess it gets to a point that there's all this fiction still out there about the war. Is that fair to say in terms of what people think when they think of the Vietnam War? Is that right, Lien? Maybe
I would just one of the things that and again, just because I had assigned, since Turning Point Vietnam War hadn't come out yet, I usually assigned the Florentine films, and one of the big differences is that what Brian was able to put together for Turning Point, the Vietnam War, is a whole slew of new perspectives, and particularly the Republic of Vietnam or South Vietnamese voices. And I think that by incorporating those new perspectives, as well as covering a lot of these really important terrain, I would say, particularly on the U.S. side, the impact of the war on American society, on the American military, on American foreign policy. We need to go through them again as a new generation is understanding the impact of the Vietnam War, particularly today. And so that was a huge difference between this documentary and anything that came before it, is really the collection of new perspectives. In addition to that, I think that what Brian was able to put together, and I'm not tooting my own horn because, as I said, I think I was one of the most inarticulate talking heads, is that the new scholarship has unearthed so much. That they've challenged the conventional wisdom. They've challenged the shibboleths. I mean, they're really coming up with new interpretations. And this documentary put this all together. And one of the things that I think the viewers will come away with is that history is a living, breathing thing. Right. It's never static. There's no such thing as capital T truth. It is up to the in this case, the audience to take away certain interpretations. They'll come to their own conclusions, and that's what a really good documentary does.
And you're talking about these new and overlooked perspectives. I mean, Brian, I think we were talking before we actually started filming. I mean, one thing that struck me was the number of women that are interviewed in this doc. And was that a conscious effort on your part, or is it just in doing the work, these voices kept coming, and you realized they needed to be heard?
I guess it's both a conscious effort and also just what made the most sense. First of all, I want to say that Lynn was incredible in the series. And
I would agree.
Not, yeah. I don't know what one of the most inarticulate. That's definitely not true. It was a foundational interview for us, and we just learned so much from. And I personally learned so much from her interview. I think we interviewed you twice, and it was pretty key to our understanding of this. But I think there's so often, the events of this war are told from the American perspective only. And right. I think that is important. I said my dad was here, so I can't separate myself. It was fought in the war, so I can't separate myself from that. But, this notion of this, some people have called it civil war as much as anything else. These events can't be you can't separate it from the fact that there's two different communities that have very different visions of what the future of their country might be. So we looked at, we tried to talk to as many people as we could, people who, who have been termed and have embraced the term Viet Cong, soldiers from both North and South, everyday citizens from both sides who were pulled into the war. I think we did a screening down in Southern California just recently with some of the South Vietnamese community. There's a huge, of course, diaspora there, I was very moving screening. It was a live screening, which we don't always get to do in the digital streaming age. This is a sort of throwback, but and it was a packed theater, and we watched the last episode, and it just palpable emotion and people talking about that side of things. And when you're talking about the South Vietnamese community, I don't think that story has been told well over time, or in previous incarnations of Vietnam War series. But these people that were forced to leave their country behind, find refuge in the United States and elsewhere, and in the process left behind their homes, often very close family members, and just leaving behind a future that they thought that they had for themselves. And I just think that's a really critical part of the story. So that, we just tried to get you do as much research as you can, and you have the best intentions, and then you talk to amazing people like Lane and others, and you let that get you to the next level.
I gather you had some special access, is that right? You had the CBS News archives, and but actually, even as you were telling about this Vietnamese story, you had Vietnamese footage that's never been seen before, I think.
Yeah, we had a lot of footage that hasn't been seen before, and I wasn't. I was a little surprised by that. Actually, we did a partnership with CBS, who is one of the networks that was most kind of embedded in Vietnam. When you think about Morley Safer and Dan Rather, and
they were the creme de la creme of network news at the time.
Yeah. And so we did a kind of partnership with them to look through their archives, and I think. I don't know if they should hear me say this, but maybe it's partly disorganization of their archives, or not quite understanding what they had, or nobody just kind of went through it. But we really kind of combed through that. And there's a lot of stuff that just has never been seen before about Vietnam that's in this series. So it's surprising because it was there in the vaults.
And then the Vietnamese footage, where'd that come from?
Just digging and talking to people. Vietnam is such interesting. The period is so interesting because technology is changing so rapidly here. Even from the beginning of the American involvement to the end, you're just talking about cameras that are more easily handheld, portable recording devices. Just this massive kind of shift in how people are recording their environment, recording their experiences, recording historical events. It really, this period stands out in that regard too.
Yeah. And I know it's called, go ahead, Lien.
Oh, Matthew, I just wanted to jump in from what Brian was saying. The first I was going to say is that there's such a heterogeneity of Vietnamese diasporic perspectives, but if he was able to make, the sort of the hub, the Orange County community, what we call the sort of Mecca in the Vietnamese American community, happy, and just, if they went away really moved by the final episode, that is saying a lot because there is such a heterogeneity of opinions and perspectives with regard to the fall of Saigon and the war in general. So just wanted to kind of give kudos and congratulate Brian and the team on that. And the second thing I just wanted to weigh in on women's voices and the war, and that definitely is a standout. And one of the things that I wanted to draw attention to is that our artist in residence here at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute just had a piece out in Associated Press about how that's a distinction between the Vietnam War in American cinema and in Vietnamese cinema, is that the perspective from American cinema has tended to come from male characters, from the soldiers on the ground, whereas the majority of Vietnamese films, both from the North and the South and present day Vietnam, tend to actually focus on the the women's experiences, on the feminine voice. And so that's just a very strange, but there is a gendered aspect to the amount of attention paid. And in this case, it's cinema, but it can easily apply to documentaries as well.
I think that's very interesting. And I think actually even on the American side, right? Brian, sorry, there's, I think you even mentioned that there's a section there, even in one episode, where you talk about how LBJ or Nixon's lost the mothers, right? The mothers turn against the war. And I think that is a perspective it's probably been there, but it's not one I remember being brought up very much. The focus is always on the student protests or this sort of thing.
I think so. That's true. That's true, and an interesting part of it. I think when you go to Vietnam and you do interviews there, you can't escape this.
Right.
And I would say some of the fiercest voices, the most sort of passionate voices we had were some of the women that we spoke with there. It's just such a critical part of this war. And I just don't think you understand it without really understanding people that were fighting.
Watching the episodes that I'm watching, it's the same thing. I mean, I'm just astounded by the footage and by the interviews, particularly with the National Liberation Fighters, or what was derogatorily called the Viet Cong, the VC.
Right.
And I wondered about the whole process and the experience of getting these stories out of veterans on the Vietnamese side in Vietnam, particularly those who fought on the communist side as well as the Republic of Vietnam. But how was that whole process of making the documentary in Vietnam?
Going to Vietnam is one of the amazing experiences I've had, and certainly in the last few years. I mean, it was a really incredible experience. And in terms of finding voices and traveling and convincing people to talk to us and the research, I have to tip my hat to Duan and Tommy Nguyen, who helped us with this, and they were there with us the whole time. And it's really the depth of their passion and interest that really, kind of got results there. But it was I think it was a difficult process to some degree. We are used to being able to talk to anybody we want, and it's not the way it works there. So there is some there were some procedures we had to go through. We had to sort of, I think people were, we didn't know a lot about this, but I'm pretty sure people were vetted before they, in the days before they talked to us. I'm pretty sure they were visited by people from the government. We got little indications about that. I don't know how extreme that was or what they said, but everybody seemed very candid with us. I felt like we were getting stories that were very, just very real to me. You have to understand that there's a pressure there that to sort of not say anything derogatory, basically, about the government. So you have to, I think you go into that with that knowledge. But Duan and Tommy navigated a lot of that for us, and they were just amazing, and they're just excellent filmmakers themselves.
Thank you, Brian. I really hope that you have the opportunity to return to Vietnam and perhaps do a screening, mainly because things are changing and rapidly evolving in the country, and a lot of it rests on our understanding of the history of the war. And for the first time, I'm seeing, and this is after you were filming in Vietnam, but under the new leadership, they really want to promote reconciliation between Vietnamese. And so I think your documentary is really valuable for that reason, because you do incorporate so many different perspectives of the Vietnamese sides that I would imagine this documentary would go a long way in promoting reconciliation between the diaspora as well as Vietnamese in country, because the current leadership, particularly under General Secretary To Lam, knows that the foundation for better relations all rests upon our understanding and our ability to grapple with the history of that divisive, terrible Civil War and that international war. So I volunteer myself to be there with you when you screen.
Oh my God,
Again, maybe
I
it's
would
the
love
final
that.
episode or the first episode or all 5 in Vietnam.
I would love that so much. Yeah, well, let's try to make that happen.
Yes.
You know? Yeah. No, I think that would be amazing. It really would.
I think that also raises an excellent point because I think, I mean, anyways, yeah, I think the Civil War element is often sort of downplayed. We always, as an American, I will say that it always tends to be more about the North and communism and the Cold War and that lens. But how divided is, and you talk about it in the 5th episode, but how divided is Vietnam even to this day? Because, I mean, you say that, I think there's a voice, one of the subjects says, like all civil wars, they take, think about our own U.S. Civil War, many generations to kind of get over that. You could still say we're living from the effects of that to some degree. How divided is Vietnam still?
Okay, I'll take a stab first, but I definitely want Brian to answer this question based
I
on
think you're
experience of
vastly more
interviewing.
qualified here. Yeah.
Matthew, it's such a great question. And one of the issues that we grappled with in our recent 50/30 commemorations here at my university was that it's much easier to promote reconciliation between states. So the United States and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, but it's much more difficult to promote reconciliation domestically. So we see that already with American society. I imagine that there's probably a much broader spectrum about American understanding of that war in this current climate than there was even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because again, our interpretation of history constantly changes. And then likewise, I mean, we've been discussing the sort of different Vietnamese perspectives. And even within the country, again, I've been traveling there since 1994. And regionally, there's differences, not just between sort of the distinction between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, divided at the 17th parallel, but only erased in 1976. But that regionalism still exists today. And it doesn't break down by sort of the historic separation. So that's the shorthand way of saying that even domestically within Vietnam, and I'm leaving aside the diaspora, that you see distinctions and differences. And some of them can trace back to the war's history. Other differences, regional differences, has more to do with the legacies of the Vietnam War and how much resources or funding have been addressed to, let's say, Veterans Association from any part of the country. And then if you add in the layer of, the former Republic of Vietnam, some of the citizens' leadership are still there in Vietnam, went through a really terrible period in which national reunification of salvation was done in too fast and too quick a manner to really deal with the wounds of war and to heal. And so I think there's vestiges of that prevented there to be the sort of coming together. But that, as you were saying, Matthew, is the story of the American Civil War as well. I mean, if you take into account Reconstruction, everything, when did the United States and Americans really get over the Civil War and come to a point where we can agree on any synthetic account or say that is the true interpretation, that it was about was about a war over slavery, a war over states' rights, what have you. But I think Vietnam is not there yet where we can agree on one interpretation. But for me as a historian, I think that is a good thing. That is, that's what I want to impart to my students, because with every with every set of new stories, new perspectives, new documents, new tapes that could be founded, new presidential, briefings which we still don't have access to, could change, the account in a massive way. That I'm okay with that. But in terms of really being able to have a sort of just even a foundation of say, okay, we can at least agree that there were two sides, that something as simple as the reunification elections were never set in stone in 1956. So when they didn't happen, X, Y, and Z, we're not there yet for some of these issues. Or the famous counterfactuals: had Ngo Dinh Diem not been assassinated, had Kennedy not been assassinated, et cetera. We're not there yet to have a sort of a frank discussion in ways that I can see other countries, particularly those affected by civil war, have arrived at.
It's so interesting. I mean, I can add one small just detail here, and I'm curious what Lien thinks of this. But one of the interviews we did was with Madame Nguyen, who was I'm not going to get her first name right, but she's a diplomat for decades, specializing in global issues and all sorts of things. Very prominent person, and she talked about the re-education camps, and of course, after the fall of Saigon, hundreds of people, thousands of former South Vietnamese soldiers, officials, perceived dissidents were sent to these re-education camps, and many stayed there for years without trial, kept with their families, and we interviewed some people in the documentary. But she mentioned that this had been a mistake.
Yeah.
And when that happened, the producer that I mentioned earlier, Dwan Curtis, said, "Oh my God," because I was listening to her, and we did, we can sort of you have to focus and listen to multiple things at once. Right. And she's like, "I can't believe," she said, "I've never heard anybody say that." And it was her belief that was a kind of step in the kind of direction of reconciliation, or a kind of understanding of history in a little bit different way. She had said, "I never actually heard anybody admit that period was a mistake." Whether that's true or not, Lynn would know better, but she saw that as a moment of maybe there is something kind of new here.
It was so striking, Brian, that to the point that I noted and thought, is she still in Vietnam? Is she, is she still part of the official, whatever, power structure or whatever, to say something like that, But she was very, very upfront about it. Very direct.
Just by way of background, she comes from a very prominent family. She's a sort of descendant of elite that catered to the royalty, and then she was an intellectual and comes from a prominent family in the South, but she was very much sympathetic to the revolution. And so she was able to retain her position, and she still does live in Vietnam, and she is a wonderful ambassador for the country. But I do think it is very it's telling that she was able to say that the re-education camps were a mistake. The reason for that is that, if you kind of keep things again in context, there was a bloodbath in Cambodia, that the communists in Cambodia did settle the score, and they went over. I mean, they basically conducted an auto-genocide. In order to deal with what happened in the Second Indochina War, what we know as the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese Communist government did not execute a bloodbath, but they had what is really a dark spot in the history, which are these re-education camps that stayed in existence for more than decades after after 75, and then more than 1 million people went through these re-education camps that had nothing to do with the war. So this is what I was talking about, that some of this is tied to the war's history, but then you also had later on enemies of the state that had no connection to what, that they were sent to re-education camp, but not because of anything they did prior to 1975, that their re-education had to do with something that occurred after 75. So that is something that, again, the sort of the Vietnamese have to grapple with, that it is tied to the Vietnam War and its legacies, but it is something that's a big wall or stumbling block to reconciliation.
I'm going to give our listeners and viewers a quick break, but just to say that we'll be right back with Lien-Hang Nguyen, historian and talking head. More than that, also a professor, or certainly teaches at Columbia, and Brian Knappenberger, the award-winning director and producer of Turning Point, The Vietnam War, streaming on Netflix.
Factual America is brought to you by Alamo Pictures, a London-based production company specializing in feature documentaries, factual television, and shorts about the U.S. Benefiting from an outsider's keen eye and years of stateside experience, Alamo's filmmakers explore topical, uniquely American stories from a sympathetic European perspective. The result is engaging cinema and television that defies stereotypes and helps audiences truly understand what makes America tick. Check out Alamo's website at alamopictures.co.uk to be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing Alamo's films, and to connect with the team. Now back to Factual America.
Welcome back to Factual America. We're here with Lien-Hang Nguyen and Brian Knappenberger. We're talking about Turning Point, the Vietnam War, streaming on Netflix. Talking about a lot of these new perspectives, how views and the things are more and more things are coming to light, or at least we're paying attention to them. We talked about some of the archive that you had access to. I know we've had a lot more declassification of documents. We've got these amazing White House recordings that any doc that mines those, I'm always find interesting with JFK and LBJ and Nixon, certainly. And going through all those archives and all these hours of interviews and meeting people and talking to people like Lien, was there anything that really surprised you or impressed you most? Or did it change your views on terms of how of your view of the Vietnam War?
For sure, it definitely changed it. Talking to so many people about these events. It's interesting because the previous seasons of Turning Point have been about, the first season was about 9/11, right, which we all kind of lived through. And the Cold War, which I feel like was woven right into my DNA somehow, like radiation got me somehow. But Vietnam I didn't live through. My dad was there, and I it's become this sort of pastiche or something of images of little bits of Super 8 film that he brought back that I found in a cardboard box that said Cambodia, the small things, and so I have to make a sense of what this was, and where was this in the war, what time frame was he there, and stories and things that aren't stories but were said to me that I either understood or didn't understand. It was a kind of untangling of a mystery of my early life. I mean, it really was. I was born from that period in more ways than one. I think it was something that affected me. I mean, my parents were married before he went to war and stuff like that. So piecing that together, I think, was an entry point into this, and I feel like it's just powerful to kind of untangle these stories in that regard. But the thing that's always surprising, you mentioned the tapes, and we went through hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of tapes with the help of the Miller library, and it's just that never ceases to amaze you. Just the candid nature of those recordings. These are primarily the three presidents that primarily did record themselves. Kennedy had a little system where he could turn it on and off. Johnson recorded his phone calls and then started recording some of his other conversations, and Nixon just let it roll. And after what happened to Nixon, no other presidents that we know of did that. So for good reason. So, but here you are with these very candid indications of what they, glimpses into what they were saying in private. And it's so easy as a filmmaker to then just find the date and understand what they were saying in public and compare those two things. And that's, I'm certainly not the first person to come to this to understand this stratospheric difference between what was said in private and public. But I think we got another little glimpse of it here in new ways, and it never kind of quite ceases to amaze or even in some ways horrify you, that the difference between what they were thinking and what they were saying to the American public is so stark.
I mean, back to those tapes as well. I mean, I think, as you say, they've been mined by others, but I think what came in and what comes out is a thread, certainly, is, whether it's John F. Kennedy or Lyndon Baines Johnson or then Nixon, is they all know from the beginning this isn't going to end well. It really, I mean, pretty much, And so whatever would have happened if Kennedy hadn't been shot or not, or what, But yet at the same time, almost feel here we are, most powerful man in the world, essentially, but yet feel powerless to do anything different than the path they're on. Really, it's kind of remarkable.
And why do they have no power?
Why can't they just say
they are cowering to the election cycle in America, and that's what's dictating it a lot of times. So I mean, of course they have power to make decisions and to alter the course of the war, but I think that the political calculus was more had priority for them.
Yeah.
More and more scholars are saying it wasn't, the strategy of containment misapplied or gone awry. It really was all about credibility. It was about certain decision makers, certain leaders, certain presidents, all the presidents involved with Vietnam not wanting to be the president that would lose another country to communism.
Exactly.
So when it's at that level, I mean, then it is that, I think this is, you assemble the best historians, and we have gone through the Miller Center and all of those recordings, and it just pains me when you hear the voices of the presidents and what they're thinking in private, what they're doing in private, and then, as you were saying, juxtapose that with the with basically all of the sort of what they said on camera, what they said to the media, what they said to the American people. I mean, the lies and the deception. It's something that's heartbreaking, and the students, I think, now understand. This was a great theme that you were talking about in the documentary. This is the height of the imperial presidency during the Cold War, and it does come down. Again, spoiler alert. But it's just temporary, because we see it on the rise, and we saw it on the rise in the 80s, and then again. Again, the history doesn't repeat itself, but there are echoes, and at least I hope that one of the viewers, some of the viewers, all of the viewers, figure out how we got out of that mess, how we were able to expose these lies and change policy, change something that we don't like what's going on today, and see how we were able to grapple with it back then. I think that would be a huge service.
Isn't it often we learn the wrong lessons, right? So, I mean, if I recall, and this also gets something that Brian, was going to ask you about, but I seem to remember the lessons we learned, especially going into the Gulf War and conflicts that have happened since then, is, well, you just have to limit the impact that it has on the general population. You have to, so you could argue U.S. has been at war for many decades, and yet the average person on the street doesn't really feel it. Sort of limited exposure, or you only go into war if this is, because the lesson we've learned is you've got to keep hearts and minds at home. It's not because certain policies were wrong or whatever. And then the proper lessons, I think the film gets to this as well. I mean, you're talking about the echoes, Lien. There's a lot of echoes in the last few years of, you couldn't help but see what was happening. And I'm not trying to be political in this, but you couldn't help but see what was happening in Afghanistan, and not just immediately, those of us of a certain age, see images of Saigon in 1975, right? You do a very excellent piece there, Brian, where the imagery, you've got a still from Vietnam, and then a still from Iraq, and then you've got to put them next to each other, and they're almost exactly the same. It's
hard
just
to
the
tell the
people.
difference.
I mean, it's actually. I mean, I think that's quite incredible. I mean, you might tell me it wasn't hard. There's loads of these images, but to have all that photojournalism juxtaposed that way was very powerful.
Yeah, I think it says a lot. And it's true that the so much talk about the lessons of military invention in Vietnam, and including by very high level officials and military people, writing books about this. But it's true that one of the wrong lessons is, well, let's just not let the American public in as much.
Right.
Let's not let people photograph the dead bodies when they come home. Let's not let that, which was the case, which was prohibited in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Let's just not give people access, and kind of keep this from the American public. And I absolutely, of course, think that's the wrong lesson here.
And I'll just echo that what Brian was saying. I mean, it's low hanging fruit. You can use a history book that justifies American intervention, and a lot of I won't name which president used that to justify the war in the Middle East. And then, you'll have a different president say, we'll take this account that was very critical of U.S. military intervention, that those are the right lessons to apply. So, it's easy to find any justification after the fact, and that has definitely been the case with the Vietnam War, which is why it's so important, because it will continue to guide the United States moving forward as it continues to be involved in overseas conflicts.
Something I wanted to then ask both of you, because this gets to one of the premises of the film, and as you've already stated, is that from the very beginning in this discussion, is that Vietnam is still shapes us today. We're still living with it. It influences. It's of everything that you've that you've looked at in your series, the Turning Point series. So I find it very interesting because you have, I would have thought, I guess we sometimes see Vietnam as a subset of the Cold War, right? But you've looked at the Cold War. I would have thought that even the war on terror and after, 9/11 is something we're still living with. I mean, I'm not saying you're not saying we're not, but my understanding is you're saying that Vietnam War is really what we need to be looking at. That is a turning point that explains a lot about what's been happening for the last in American society for 50 years. Is that fair enough?
Well, yeah, there's lots. There's
a lot going on there, right?
Lots of history, and I guess one of my not to get too deep or philosophical, but I sometimes don't think there is such a thing as the past. That's a weird thing to say, but I don't. We tend to look at these as chapters of something in our history, or to go back and look at World War II as if it were some separate event from us, or certainly Vietnam is, to me, maybe more palpable. But it's like, these aren't we're not transporting back and in different fashions and different it's not somehow separate from us. This is just part of the same stage we're still on, and we're deeply connected at all times to our past, and we want to understand the people that were making decisions, living through this, reacting to the events as they saw them in real time. And to understand how those decisions and those people and those people's lives and those people's stories rippled through history and gave us the stage that we're on now. I do think that there's occasionally, and I don't mean to get philosophical, but there is a kind of a tendency to want to think of these things as separate stages or something, or somehow that we're separate from them, but we're not. This is the human drama. We're a part of this. We're still a part of this. They're still affecting us, the decisions that were made here. This is still a part of who we are. And so, to understand that, to understand our current world and the way we interact with leaders and institutions and all kinds of stuff, you have to understand who we are and what our roots are. And I think that's what this is. So I think that's one of the things we try to do with the series, is to just to understand that this is a part of the human drama that has led us to we're still connected very much to this stuff.
That was so articulate and so well said. And one of the things that strikes me when I teach about, because I'm actually a Cold War historian, Brian. So for me, everything is sort of looking at the post-45 era. And when I start some of my courses, whether it be in the Vietnam War or U.S. East Asian relations or Vietnam in the world, I say Vietnam was probably the biggest victim of post-1945 politics or history, or whatever you want to say, the course of events. That, in sort of looking at the process of decolonization, it had to go to war. If you're talking about reunification, it had to go to war. If you're talking about sort of end of Cold War development, had to go to war. So it suffered 3 wars during the post-45 era. But Vietnam is now in the 21st century, probably the linchpin for peace in the 21st century Cold War, if you accept that that's what's going on between the United States and China. That Vietnam, once again, occupies a very important position. But the one thing that we, of course, and again, I consider myself Vietnamese, it doesn't matter that I am also American, that it doesn't then be the victim, once again, of the 21st century international relations. But it's really that U.S.-Vietnam interaction that very much sort of dictated the course of post-45 history will once again, I think, be very important in moving into the third decade, fourth decade of the 21st century. So it's one of these things that, again, the past, it's not really the past. And there's a lot to learn about the past if we really want to chart a peaceful present and sort of like everlasting peace into the future. And if we don't study it, then we could be susceptible to then repeating some of the more tragic mistakes and the violent mistakes of the 20th century.
That is so true. There are answers in these events and in our modern relationship with Vietnam that might be critical for us.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, again, always being a downer on things, I think, but Vietnam's caught in another war. It's in a trade war, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's caught right in the middle between China and the U.S., and how that plays out will be very interesting. I mean, the way I see it, and it's one thing we haven't really you've mentioned it, and obviously one thing that the doc does a lot about is talking about credibility gaps and the loss of faith in the government, and the sort of what's happening in U.S. society at the moment. I mean, it strikes me as part of this is all this is all kind of a continuum, isn't it? It's the impact of 80 years almost of nonstop war of some sort. It's World War II. Then you go to the Cold War, which, okay, it's not a hot war, but it's Cold War, and so the U.S. is still at war. And you've got Vietnam, and then you got stuff going on in Central America, and then you go to 9/11, and then it's the war on terror, and then it's like, so we're, as a U.S. society, we've been kind of at some sort of war footing for many decades. And I think probably some would say that can do some damage in terms of how we interact with each other, and certainly in terms of opening wounds and fissures and things like that. All that said, I mean, back to the sort of the filmmaking, the thing that struck me as well, because you get this all into 5 episodes, which is quite a challenge. I imagine. I don't know how you did that, but you did. How do you decide which tent poles to use, basically, when you're telling that story? Because obviously you talk on My Lai, you talk about Tet, obviously seem obvious, and I'll just talk from a personal experience. And episode 5 is especially emotional. And I, as a kid, so some kids sit on the sofa and watch the baseball game with their dad. What I did is every night I watched the evening news with my dad, pretty much, from the early 70s onwards, right? And there are things that I've often thought were false memories. But then, something, and I've now looked it up since watching it, your doc, and it's a relatively small Wikipedia entry, but things like Operation Baby Lift, right? So the one thing that I have just seared in my mind is the news coverage of the C-5 crash at the Tan-Son Air Base.
Oh, yeah.
But to the point that I thought, I wasn't even sure that it ever actually happened. But that isn't a major event in some people's standpoint. I don't. But you're looking concerned, Brian. But I think. But why? How do you choose that? Is like that's something I want to bring out and make a because it's not something that others maybe have covered as much.
Yeah, I think that you've hit on the most difficult part of creating something like this. You embark on this and you think 5 hours might be enough, and you realize it's not even close as soon as you start working. But I think it's true with almost everything I've done. It's the incredible team that we have, the producers that we have, and everybody. We just kind of really think about this and what parts of the story are most insightful for any part of the history. How are you going to get as broad a picture as you can with the time that you have? So in 5 hours, I mean, there's a lot of amazing story. I mean, there's a lot of great, incredible story, stuff that we had to cut out, of course. And lots of other little angles that we could have explored, and I feel could be their 5-part series just by themselves. So it is a process of selection and process of kind of understanding what putting things together that might make the most sense or bring the most complexity and just bring people into the story as much as possible. And tell as a full and as rich a story as you possibly can, and in that amount of time. So, I think Baby Lift is a story that I know a lot of people probably didn't know, and also, but even if you did, it says something about the rush to get out. I mean, it says something about what that kind of lack of planning, that lack of vision about what might happen. It says a lot about that hurried time towards the end of the war and the impact it had on people.
I understand we've got to wrap things up. We're running out of time, but thank you so much for your time. It's been very much appreciated. I really have enjoyed it. It's just to remind our listeners and viewers, we've been talking with Lien-Hang Nguyen and Brian Knappenberger, and we've been talking about Turning Point, the Vietnam War, streaming on Netflix. Lien, Brian, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure. I hope to get you on again sometime. And thanks again for making this film. Take care.
Great. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Factual America. Please subscribe and like us and share us with friends and family. Find us on YouTube, social media, and factualamerica.com. This is Matthew Sherwood, signing off.